My dad said, light makes women vain, and forced me to live in total darkness after I got my period at 13. He sealed my windows with black plastic, removed all light bulbs, and convinced our entire town I had a genetic light sensitivity disorder. When I finally escaped after 2 years using a flashlight, my brother snuck me. The neighbors found me with vitamin D deficiency, so severe my teeth were falling out, but half the community signed a petition demanding I be returned to my specialized medical care. In my family, girls were forced to live in darkness the moment you got your first period. According to my dad, light made women look obsessed and distracted them from their duties. Dad always treated us like animals. If my mom's showers were over 3 minutes, she didn't get to eat dinner. He cut our hair himself with kitchen scissors, leaving it jagged because only vain women need styled hair. Mom never fought back. She learned early that resistance meant sleeping in the garage on concrete, even in winter. For context, his own mother had abandoned him when he was 12 to become a model, and according to him, it was because she valued her face more than her children. So instead of going to therapy or journaling, he decided that women with mirrors become monsters, and now we all had to suffer. Even before the darkness rule, there were other demands. No mirrors in bedrooms, no reflective surfaces, makeup was banned. In public, we wore shapeless gray clothing. At home, we wore literal garbage bags. If he caught us looking at our reflection in windows or spoons, we'd spend the day with paper bags over our heads to remember that beauty is skin deep. Everything changed when I got my period at 13. I woke up in blood-soaked sheets, terrified. My dad's eyes lit up like it was Christmas. He gave his recited speech about how menstruation marks when female narcissistic genes are activated. He'd researched this extensively, showing us printed articles about hormones and appearance obsession. From that day forward, I would live in darkness. No lights, no windows, no chance to see myself or anything else. If you can't see, he said, you can't abandon me. Needless to say, he'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. Like clockwork, he installed blackout curtains in my room, removed the light bulbs, and handed me a flashlight with dead batteries, his idea of a joke. Your brothers need light to work and build, he explained. You need darkness to learn humility. Mom helped him seal my windows with black plastic, with tears streaming down her face that I could hear but not see. And since I was homeschooled my whole life, I had no escape. Heck, I didn't even know this wasn't normal. My dad had convinced me that this is just the way the world worked. Living in darkness destroyed me from the inside out. I navigated by touch, memorizing the exact number of steps between furniture, 23 from bed to door, 41 to the bathroom. But Dad would rearrange things while I slept. I'd wake to crash face first into relocated dressers, blood pouring from my nose, him laughing upstairs. I ate in darkness, food missing my mouth, sauce staining clothes I couldn't see. Dad would describe my messy appearance to my brothers, making them laugh at the she-creature I'd become. My fingernails fell out one by one. When my sister Emma got her period at 11, she joined me in darkness. We'd hold hands and cry, two blind girls in our own home. The breaking point came when I fell down the stairs and fractured my wrist. Dad refused to take me to the hospital because they'd contaminate me with light. I wrapped it myself in the dark, feeling the bones grind. Even to this day, my hand is still crooked. Emma had developed such severe vitamin D deficiency that her teeth were loosening. We were dying in that darkness, and he called it purification. But then came my saving grace. My brother Michael finally effing decided to question Dad's rules. He snuck me a keychain flashlight, tiny but functional. It was the first beam of light I had seen in 2 years. But my happiness was cut short, because the first thing I saw were my gray hands, the bruises, the filth I'd been living in. But Michael's gift-giving wasn't over, because that's when he helped me plan. He'd leave his window unlocked, creating distractions. He insisted that we wait for the perfect moment, but I couldn't resist anymore. And just 3 days later, I crept out using the flashlight. The moonlight outside felt like a burning ring light. I knew exactly which woman to go to, my neighbor, because sometimes I could hear her through the vents, and she had a kind voice. Unfortunately, when she opened the door, she gave me a huge hug, because it was then that I realized just how messed up my childhood really was. She tried not to stare, but I knew what she was thinking. I looked like a sewage rat. She called child services immediately while I sat in her kitchen, staring at the overhead light like it was a meteor. When the investigation started, Dad went nuclear. He filed kidnapping charges, claiming the neighbor had stolen his light-sensitive daughter. People who'd known me my whole life signed a petition demanding my return. He hired a lawyer who argued that parents had freedom to raise children without artificial light. The worst part was when he brought Emma to the courtroom. It was her first exposure to light in over a year. She writhed and screamed, which he used to prove his point about our condition. The judge ordered a recess while Emma continued screaming. I watched Dad carry her out, her hands clawing at her eyes. The fluorescent courtroom lights made my own vision blur, but I forced myself to keep looking. 2 years of darkness had left me with permanent light sensitivity, something Dad's lawyer kept emphasizing. Back at the neighbor's house, I huddled under her kitchen table while Dad pounded on the front door. The overhead light felt like needles in my retinas, but I couldn't go back to darkness. Not again. My neighbor Catherine locked every deadbolt and called 911. Through the door, Dad kept shouting about his sick daughter needing specialized care. When the police arrived, their flashlight beams sent me into a panic. I pressed my palms against my eyes, tears streaming through my fingers. The officers exchanged glances. One wrote something in his notepad while Dad explained my genetic light sensitivity disorder. He showed them medical papers, speaking calmly about rare conditions and specialized home treatment. The crying girl under the table who couldn't look at them directly seemed to prove his point. I tried explaining through my tears, but keeping my eyes covered while speaking made me appear evasive. Every time I lowered my hands to make eye contact, the pain forced them back up. The officers asked why I ran away if I was receiving medical care. Dad mentioned my history of confusion during episodes. The paramedic who examined me faced a choice. My vitamin D levels were dangerously low. My bones showed signs of malnutrition. Old fractures had healed wrong, but Dad stood nearby, casually mentioning he knew the paramedic supervisor from church. The medical report would need to be very specific about what was documented. I had to decide quickly whether to mention Emma. Dad was already telling officers about her worst condition, how she needed immediate return to her controlled environment. If I stayed quiet, maybe I could establish my own safety first. But Emma was dying in that darkness. I chose to describe her symptoms symptoms using medical terms Michael had taught me. The officer's expressions changed. Now I sounded coached. Child services arrived just as Dad's lawyer friend pulled up in an expensive car. My eyes had started bleeding from the light exposure, thin red tears that the paramedic carefully documented. Dad rushed over with false concern, explaining how this proved my genetic condition. The symptoms matched his fabricated medical records perfectly. Dad broke down sobbing on the front lawn. Several neighbors gathered around, comforting him as he wailed about his sick babies. They glared at Catherine, whispering about kidnapping. Someone mentioned calling their pastor. Dad's performance was flawless. A grieving father whose disturbed daughter had been lured away during a medical crisis. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Dad knew he'd helped me escape. The punishment would be living in the garage. Youth Pastor Tim was trying to calm Dad down, but it wasn't working. Michael was scared. I'd promised to protect him if he helped me, but now he was facing Dad's rage alone. The hospital exam revealed bones like an elderly woman's. Severe vitamin deficiencies had damaged my organs. Infected wounds covered my legs from stumbling in darkness. The nurse photographed everything, thinking she was documenting abuse. She didn't know these images would later support Dad's genetic disorder story. Every symptom matched the fake condition he'd researched. Hospital social workers needed Dad's insurance information to approve treatment. He controlled what procedures I could receive, delaying authorization while demanding second opinions. The bone density medication I desperately needed waited behind his signature. Each day without it caused more damage, which he documented as the progression of my genetic condition. Dad's lawyer played a recorded phone call from Mom. Her tearful voice claimed I'd had episodes like this after grandfather died. Complete fabrication, but it sounded believable. She described me building elaborate stories when stressed, unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. The social worker took notes about my possible psychological issues. Within hours, Dad posted in the community Facebook group about my kidnapping during a medical crisis. Screenshots spread through our small town. Prayer chains started. Fundraisers were suggested for his family's medical bills. He became the sympathetic father dealing with a disturbed daughter's rebellion against necessary treatment. My attempts to contact Emma were flagged by hospital staff. They noted my fixation on my sister as concerning behavior. When I insisted she needed help, they added it to my psychiatric evaluation. Everything I did to save her made me appear more unstable. Dad had thought of everything. The pain medication for my fractures made me slur during the official CPS interview. This is absolutely horrifying. The dad's twisted logic about light and women is making my stomach turn. Cutting their hair with kitchen scissors and making them wear garbage bags? I struggled to keep my thoughts clear while explaining years of abuse. The interviewer kept asking me to speak up, but the substances made everything fuzzy. My credibility crumbled with each mumbled response. The community center director initially promised to support my case. He'd seen our family's strange dynamics during homeschool events, but his wife reminded him that Dad served as head of the facilities committee. Their operating budget depended on his approval. The director withdrew his offer to testify, citing concerns about taking sides in family matters. Local Facebook filled with prayers for our family. My former teacher posted about how I'd always seemed troubled, but the church secretary privately messaged Catherine, saying she was praying for the truth to come out. Small cracks appeared in Dad's perfect image, but not enough to matter. Dad claimed Catherine had altered my medical records to frame him. He pointed to intake forms I'd signed but couldn't read due to light sensitivity. How could I verify what I'd agreed to when I couldn't see? The accusation of document tampering added another layer to his victimhood. My best friend's mother admitted she needed Dad's signature for the homeschool co-op to continue. Without his approval as board member, 15 families would lose their educational option. She couldn't risk speaking against him, even though she'd noticed our family's oddities. Proving Dad had rearranged furniture to hurt us sounded paranoid to investigators. They visited our house and saw a normal layout. My claims that he'd moved things in darkness to cause injuries seemed like delusions. Who would believe furniture could be weaponized? When a nurse brought me real food, I smiled for the first time in years. Someone photographed that moment. Later, it circulated as proof I was happy to be away from my family. Dad's narrative shaped every piece of evidence. My joy at eating a hot meal became rebellion against loving parents. The CPS worker explained this had become a formal custody battle. Both sides would need lawyers. Both sides would fight for Emma and Michael. Neither of us could back down now. Dad had resources, community support, and fabricated medical evidence. I had Catherine and the truth. It didn't feel like enough. Dad started dating my former homeschool teacher, Ms. Sarah, just 2 weeks after the custody battle began. She showed up at the hospital with him, her hand on his shoulder, explaining to staff how she'd witnessed his dedication to his daughter's special needs. She quoted parenting philosophy books about raising obedient children, nodding sympathetically as Dad described my rebellion. The nurses began deferring to her educational expertise. Different nurses reported contradicting versions of my statements to the psychiatric team. The night nurse wrote that I seemed lucid but traumatized. The day nurse noted delusional thinking and light obsession. The evening nurse documented aggressive behavior when I tried to shield my eyes from overhead fluorescence. Each interpretation depended on whether they'd witnessed my genuine light sensitivity or Dad's performance about my condition. My old diary entries surfaced during the investigation. Pages where I'd written about wanting to see the sun, desperate scribbles about missing daylight, were reframed as Sewer's lied ideation. Dad's lawyer presented them as evidence of a death wish I'd documented for years. The psychiatric evaluation team added this to their growing file of concerns. Emma's friend Lily visited me during supervised visitation hours. She innocently mentioned that Emma had told her the darkness keeps us pure. She described how Emma explained that I was sick for wanting light, that real sisters would stay together in darkness forever. The supervising social worker scribbled notes about my negative influence being contradicted by my sister. Catherine's doorbell camera footage became evidence, but not in the way we'd hoped. Yes, it captured my escape, but it also showed Dad's earlier visits. Weeks of footage revealed him checking on his sick daughter, bringing medications, expressing concern to Catherine about my deteriorating condition. His groundwork made my escape look like the impulsive act of a mentally ill teenager. The family court treated my testimony about abuse as an attempt to avoid returning to medical treatment. The judge asked repeatedly about my diagnosed conditions, referencing Dad's stack of medical documentation. When I couldn't name the specific disorder I supposedly had, it reinforced the narrative believe that I was in denial about my illness. During a computer session at the hospital, I suddenly remembered Mom's cloud password. She'd spelled it out loud once while organizing photos in the darkness, thinking I couldn't hear. My fingers trembled as I logged in. Years of family photos loaded slowly. Each album was meticulously organized by date. I clicked through chronologically, watching my own deterioration documented in Dad's careful metadata notes tracking my genetic decline. Dad's social media presence painted him as a community pillar. Photos showed him teaching women modesty at church events, leading parenting workshops, organizing homeschool gatherings. Comments praised his traditional values and dedication to raising proper young ladies. The contrast between his public persona and private actions made my accusations seem impossible. The hospital psychiatrist was required to report my concerning statements about being kept in darkness as potential delusions. My insistence that this was real, not metaphorical, worried him. He prescribed antipsychotics, noting that I showed signs of a break from reality. The medication made me drowsy, which was documented as improvement in my agitation. I tried recording a phone call with Dad, hoping to capture something incriminating, but the bright phone screen triggered eye spasms. My hands shook, pupils dilating painfully. The phone clattered to the floor. Dad heard it fall and made soothing sounds about how I still couldn't handle light. The failed recording attempt was noted as another episode. Emma's homeschool evaluation deadline loomed. Someone needed legal custody to submit her paperwork, or she'd be considered truant. Dad used this urgency to push for immediate return of all children. The court faced pressure to resolve custody quickly for educational compliance. A sympathetic nurse who'd witnessed Dad's manipulation received an anonymous complaint about her professional conduct. The threat to her license was clear. She had student loans, a family to support. She withdrew her offer to testify, apologizing with tears in her eyes. Another potential ally disappeared. Dad posted old videos of my darkened room on social media, claiming he was preserving my safe space for when I returned from kidnapping. Comments flooded in praising his dedication, but I recognized the furniture arrangements in each video. He documented his own abuse, thinking it showed his care. He offered to forgive everything if I admitted I was sick and needed home treatment. The offer came through my court-appointed advocate, wrapped in language about family healing and reconciliation. Refusing would be framed as choosing rebellion over recovery. The advocate seemed to think I should consider it. I discovered Dad's doctor friend hadn't acted alone. The medical documentation required 2 signatures. A pediatric psychiatrist I'd never met had signed commitment papers, diagnosing me based solely on Dad's descriptions. The network of professionals willing to support his narrative was larger than I'd realized. Michael managed to sneak me information about Mom's prayer journal. She'd been documenting her concerns for years, but filtered through religious language about saving her daughters from vanity. Each entry showed she believed our suffering would purify us, make us worthy of God's light again. Her complicity went deeper than passive acceptance. The journal entries revealed something worse. Mom thought she was helping us achieve salvation through darkness. She'd documented our deterioration as evidence of purification, believing Dad would see our transformation and finally allow light back into our lives. She'd watched us dying and taken notes, thinking documentation would convince him the process was complete. My grandmother faced an impossible choice. Believing me meant losing access to her other grandchildren. Dad made it clear that supporting my lies would result in complete family exile. She chose neutrality, offering prayers instead of testimony. Her abandonment hurt worse than strangers' disbelief. During mandatory counseling sessions, I carefully befriended the hospital social worker. Through casual conversation, I learned about Dad's community connections, his network of influence. She didn't realize she was helping me map the system working against me. Each session revealed another thread in his web. I took a desperate risk, calling Dad's doctor friend's office. Pretending to be Dad's secretary, I scheduled a follow-up appointment for genetic testing. The doctor himself got on the line, confirming he'd falsify whatever Dad needed. The receptionist recognized my voice but stayed quiet. I had my first real evidence. Screenshots discovered on the family cloud account showed Dad researching light sensitivity disorders months before implementing the darkness rule. He'd studied symptoms, downloaded medical papers, crafted a believable condition. The premeditation was undeniable, but accessing the account without permission made the evidence questionable. Dad's mother, the grandmother who'd abandoned him to become a model, surfaced suddenly. She petitioned the court, claiming she could provide stable environment with proper medical care for my genetic condition. Fighting her petition meant missing crucial therapy appointments. The system marked me as non-compliant with treatment. Legal fees drained Catherine's savings and the small fund raised by sympathetic community members. What incredible detective work finding those screenshots of Dad researching light disorders before even starting the abuse. The way this poor girl is piecing together evidence while fighting medication that makes her drowsy is just amazing determination. Meanwhile, Dad used the community center building fund to hire an attorney specializing in parental rights. The financial imbalance grew daily. Justice seemed available only to those who could afford it. A confrontation at the grocery store between Dad's supporters and Catherine's friends traumatized an elderly clerk. She called 911 about a family dispute, adding another incident to the official record. Dad's lawyer spun it as evidence of the chaos I'd created by refusing treatment. My stable foster placement fell apart when the family received military deployment orders. Moving during the crucial testimony period meant starting over with new foster parents. The placement had teenage sons who made uncomfortable comments about my appearance. The system considered it adequate. The new foster family seemed neutral until I spotted a community newsletter on their counter. They attended Dad's weekly parenting workshops, but hid their involvement. I was living with people who believed in his methods, who thought darkness might actually help troubled girls. Mom begged me through supervised phone calls to stop hurting Daddy and come home to heal. She cried about how I was unaliving him with this rebellion, how his heart was breaking. The supervising social worker documented her maternal concern and my refusal to reconcile. My investigation into Dad's network caused unintended casualties. Michael's teacher faced suspension for not reporting suspected abuse earlier. Her daughter asked publicly why Mommy couldn't work anymore. The teacher's husband blamed me for their financial crisis, posting criticism that Dad's supporters amplified. I continued pushing forward despite knowing Michael now faced increased scrutiny at home. Every move I made to save us resulted in immediate retaliation against him, but stopping meant judgment condemning Emma to permanent darkness. The guilt of choosing between siblings ate at me constantly. The foster mother asked during dinner what if the darkness was actually protecting me from something worse. I couldn't immediately explain why that was wrong, how abuse disguised as protection was still abuse. My hesitation was noted in her weekly report as possible acknowledgement of Dad's good intentions. In court, I admitted once lying about completing homework to get computer time. It was a small childhood fib, but Dad's lawyer transformed it into evidence of my manipulative nature. If I'd lied then, why should anyone believe me now? The admission damaged my credibility significantly. Mom's journal revealed I'd written begging letters over the years, desperate attempts to document what was happening. She'd burned them all to prevent vanity of believing words have power. Every attempt I'd made to create evidence had been destroyed by the person who should have protected me. Dad's lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming I was deteriorating without home treatment. He used my weight loss in foster care, my continued light sensitivity, my emotional distress as evidence. The motion painted a picture of a sick child being denied necessary care by a system prioritizing ideology over health. Watching Dad cry in court revealed an awful truth. He genuinely believed he was saving us from becoming abandoned women like his mother. His tears were real, his pain authentic. He saw my escape as his failure to protect me from the world's corruption. The sincerity of his delusion made him more dangerous, not less. I faced an impossible choice. To achieve justice, I had to accuse Mom of abuse too, breaking my promise to protect her. She was a victim, but she'd chosen compliance over her daughter's lives. The prosecutor explained that partial truth wouldn't hold up. It was all or nothing. The sweet, trusting girl who'd believed family meant safety had to die. In her place, I became calculating and strategic, learning to document everything, trust no one completely, and plan 3 steps ahead. Survival required transformation, but I mourned who I'd been. Emma's friend's mother voluntarily provided testimony that changed everything. She brought Emma's drawings from playdates, disturbing images of girls in boxes, darkness surrounding stick figures. The pictures were dated, authenticated, impossible to dispute. Finally, evidence that didn't depend on my word alone. Proving the medical records were faked felt hollow when Dad collapsed in court. His grief for his lost daughter was genuine, even if the daughter he mourned had never existed. I watched paramedics check his vitals while his supporters glared at me like I'd murdered someone. Dad's counterclaim gained traction. He argued the foster system was destroying my health, that my condition had worsened since leaving home. The documented light sensitivity, weight loss, and psychological distress supported his argument. Some court observers began wondering if he'd been right all along. Everything hinged on Emma's testimony, but she felt betrayed by my abandonment. I'd taught her Braille using rice grains before escaping, promising we'd stay together until the light came back. Now she refused to speak to me, clinging to Dad's narrative about sisters who stay pure together. The homeschool co-op families divided into camps. Traditional discipline supporters rallied behind Dad, while child welfare advocates quietly supported me. The community split created tension at every gathering, every church service. Friendships ended over choosing sides. The judge required clear and convincing evidence of intentional harm versus medical condition. Unusual parenting wasn't automatically abuse. Dad's careful construction of a medical narrative meant we had to prove not just harm, but deliberate deception. The bar was impossibly high. I contacted Mom's estranged friend who'd known Dad before they married. She revealed she'd warned Mom about his abandonment trauma, his unhealthy fixation on preventing female vanity, but she wouldn't testify against a grieving father. Another witness who knew the truth but chose silence. The friend provided crucial context. Mom had stayed to heal him through submission, believing her sacrifice would prevent us from suffering his mother's fate. She'd thought loving him enough would fix his trauma. Instead, she'd enabled the destruction of her daughters. Mom's journal showed the final piece. She'd been documenting our deterioration, believing it would prove to Dad that darkness had purified us enough to deserve light again. Every photograph, every note was intended to show him we'd been cleansed of vanity. She thought evidence would convince him to end our suffering. Michael found Mom's hidden photos showing our progressive deterioration over the years. She'd meticulously documented every stage, every symptom. The photos were meant for her testimony about darkness purifying daughters. Instead, they became evidence of systematic abuse. I realized with crushing clarity that Mom had chosen Dad's approval over our lives. She'd watched us dying and taken notes, believing documentation would save us. The betrayal went deeper than passive acceptance. She'd been an active participant, thinking suffering equaled love. The decision to expose both parents would break our family completely, but protecting them meant enabling future victims. I committed to revealing everything, knowing it meant losing any chance of family reconciliation. Some bridges had to burn to light the way forward. Dad claimed I'd planted the evidence, but metadata proved the photos were taken during my darkness years. Date stamps, location data, even the camera model matched Mom's old phone. He hadn't known she was documenting our decline. His shock was genuine as his carefully constructed narrative crumbled. I presented evidence without emotion, maintaining dignity despite shaking hands. Each photo, each journal entry built an undeniable pattern. Dad realized Mom had betrayed him too, documenting what he'd forbidden her to see. His face crumpled as he understood she'd been watching all along. The pattern of escalating control became undeniable through Mom's documentation. What started as removing mirrors progressed to complete darkness. Each restriction built on the last, justified by preventing vanity, but ultimately about control. The progression was clearly shown in her careful notes. Both sides prepared for the final custody hearing that would determine all 3 children's fates. Dad's supporters packed the petitioner's side of the courtroom. Homeschool families, church members, community leaders who'd benefited from his involvement came to show support. We had Catherine, a few brave souls, and the truth. The courtroom atmosphere shifted when Mom's journal entries were authenticated by a handwriting expert. Each page revealed her twisted belief that documenting our suffering would eventually convince Dad to end it. The metadata expert confirmed the photo's authenticity despite Dad's tampering claims. Date stamps proved systematic documentation spanning years. Dad kept rubbing his temples from the courtroom fluorescents while Emma rocked in the corner. Their genuine light sensitivity complicated the abuse narrative. Medical experts explained how induced vitamin D deficiency amounted to slow poisoning, but Dad's visible discomfort made some observers question whether a real condition existed alongside justified the abuse. The judge ordered immediate medical evaluations for our entire family. Dad's doctor friend finally admitted he'd never personally examined us, relying entirely on Dad's descriptions. His medical license hung in the balance as he confessed to trusting Dad's assessment as a father, rather than conducting proper examinations. I watched Dad's breakdown unfold in real time. His carefully constructed world crumbled as evidence mounted. He genuinely believed he'd been preventing us from abandoning the family like his mother had. The realization that Mom had been documenting everything behind his back shattered him completely. His supporters watched their leader collapse, some beginning to question their blind faith. The prosecutor asked me to provide a victim impact statement for sentencing. I struggled with what to say. Dad wasn't evil in the traditional sense. He was deeply damaged, passing his trauma to the next generation. I asked for mandatory therapy and supervised visitation, rather than just prison. Punishment without treatment would only perpetuate the cycle. Community members packed both sides of the courtroom for the final hearing. The division was visible, with traditional parenting supporters on one side and child welfare advocates on the other. Former friends sat on opposite sides, their children's friendships casualties of adult conflicts. The neighborhood association would never recover from this split. Evidence of Dad's love twisted by untreated trauma filled the courtroom. Photos showed him teaching us, playing games, celebrating birthdays, but each happy moment was shadowed by the control lurking beneath. Love and abuse had intertwined so completely that separating them seemed impossible. The judge struggled to reconcile the caring father with the systematic abuser. Mom's photos provided undeniable proof of our deterioration. Each image showed progression from healthy children to skeletal figures with dead eyes. The timestamps revealed she'd taken photos every week, building her case for Dad to finally grant us light. Her misguided hope that documentation would save us had instead created the evidence that would imprison them both. The judge's decision came down carefully worded but firm. Custody of all 3 children went to the state with different placements based on our needs. I would transition to independence through a therapeutic foster home. Emma needed specialized care to begin light exposure therapy safely. Michael would live with approved relatives while receiving trauma counseling. Dad received a 5-year sentence with mandatory psychiatric treatment. The judge recognized that pure punishment wouldn't address the generational trauma. Dad would serve time but also receive intensive therapy to understand how his mother's abandonment had poisoned his parenting. Some victims' advocates felt the sentence was too lenient, while his supporters thought it too harsh. Mom's sentence reflected her complicated role as both victim and perpetrator. She received probation with required psychiatric treatment. The court acknowledged her own victimization while holding her accountable for choosing Dad's approval over her daughter's lives. She would undergo therapy to understand how submission had become complicity in abuse. The community's division deepened after the verdict. Some churches split over supporting traditional discipline versus child protection. The homeschool co-op disbanded when members couldn't agree on new leadership. Friendships that had lasted decades ended in bitter Facebook arguments about parental rights versus children's safety. Our case had exposed fundamental disagreements that couldn't be bridged. I began the slow process of physical recovery. Years without adequate nutrition had left permanent damage. My bones remained fragile, requiring careful monitoring. Vision problems from prolonged darkness and sudden light exposure would need ongoing treatment. Some damage was irreversible, but doctors remained hopeful about improvement with proper care. Emma's recovery proved more challenging. She'd internalized Dad's teachings more deeply, genuinely believing darkness kept us pure. Her initial light exposure therapy sessions were traumatic, with screaming and thrashing that reminded everyone of that first courtroom appearance. Specialists worked patiently to deprogram years of indoctrination, while treating her severe vitamin deficiencies. Michael struggled with survivor's guilt. He'd escaped the worst abuse by being born male, but watching his sisters suffer had left deep psychological scars. His therapy focused on processing the helplessness of witnessing abuse he couldn't stop. The therapist helped him understand that a child couldn't have saved us, though the knowledge didn't ease his guilt. Catherine faced ongoing harassment from Dad's remaining supporters. They vandalized her property, left threatening messages, accused her of destroying a godly family. She installed security cameras and changed her phone number, but the community's anger toward her act of kindness persisted. Some neighbors who'd previously been friendly now crossed the street to avoid her. The case attracted attention from child welfare organizations studying religious abuse. Researchers interviewed us about how spiritual beliefs had been weaponized to justify torture. They documented our case as an example of how isolation and homeschooling could hide severe abuse. Their findings would help train social workers to recognize similar situations. I struggled with decisions about future contact with my parents. The court allowed supervised visits if I chose them, but seeing them felt impossible yet. Dad sent letters from prison expressing confusion about why his protection had been rejected. Mom wrote begging for forgiveness while still not fully understanding her role in our abuse. Neither truly grasped the magnitude of damage they'd caused. Financial struggles compounded recovery challenges. Medical bills accumulated despite insurance coverage. Specialized therapy wasn't fully covered. The foster care stipend barely covered basic needs. Catherine had exhausted her savings on legal fees. Community fundraisers had dried up once the verdict split public opinion. Recovery required resources we didn't have. School integration proved daunting after years of isolation. I'd never been in a classroom with other students. The fluorescent lights still hurt my eyes, requiring special accommodations. Academic gaps from Dad's selective homeschooling became apparent. Social skills were non-existent. Every day felt like navigating an alien world. Dating seemed impossible when I couldn't explain my past without trauma dumping. How could I tell someone about years in darkness without scaring them away? My physical scars were visible, bones still crooked from untreated fractures, but the emotional damage ran deeper. Trust felt impossible when my own parents had tortured me in the name of love. Some of Dad's supporters established a legal fund for his appeal. They maintained his actions were protected religious expression. Online forums debated whether parents had the right to raise children without artificial light. Our case became a rallying point for both parental rights advocates and child protection activists. The culture war we'd inadvertently started showed no signs of ending. I found purpose in studying social work. My experiences, though horrific, had given me unique insight into how abuse hides behind closed doors. Professors praised my understanding of family dynamics dynamics and trauma responses. Classmates sought my perspective on cases. My pain was transforming into purpose, though the journey remained difficult. Reconnecting with extended family proved complicated. Some relatives had suspected something was wrong but hadn't intervened. Others genuinely hadn't known, living too far away to witness the signs. Guilt, anger, and grief colored every interaction. Holiday gatherings became exercises in avoiding difficult topics. The family we might have been existed only in imagination. Mom's family finally revealed they'd tried intervening years earlier. Dad had threatened legal action, claiming grandparents' rights didn't override parental authority. They'd consulted lawyers who confirmed their limited options. The system that should have protected us had instead protected our abusers' rights. Their helplessness mirrored our own. Therapy helped me understand the intergenerational trauma cycle. Dad's mother had abandoned him for freedom and glamour. He'd imprisoned his daughters to prevent abandonment. I had to choose whether to continue the cycle or break it. The decision felt heavier knowing future generations depended on my choices. 6 months after the verdict, I lived in a therapeutic foster home designed for young adults transitioning to independence. My room had windows I could open whenever I wanted, light switches I controlled, mirrors reflecting my slowly healing face. Simple freedoms felt miraculous. Recovery wasn't linear, with bad days outnumbering good ones initially. Emma had progressed to 30-minute light exposure sessions without panic attacks. Her therapy team celebrated each milestone while acknowledging the long journey ahead. She'd begun asking questions about why Dad had lied about our condition. The indoctrination was slowly cracking, replaced by anger at stolen years. Her healing would take longer than mine. Michael lived with Mom's cousin, a stable family that provided the normal childhood he'd missed. He played sports, attended public school, made friends who knew nothing about our past. The normalcy he'd always deserved was finally his. Regular therapy helped him process the survivor's guilt that still surfaced. Mom served her probation while undergoing intensive therapy. Her letters showed growing awareness of her complicity. She'd begun understanding how her submission had enabled our torture. The woman who'd helped seal my windows now worked to understand why she'd chosen a man's approval over her daughter's lives. Her journey toward accountability had barely begun. Dad's prison therapy revealed the depth of his pathology. His mother's abandonment had created a wound that festered into systematic abuse. He still struggled to see his actions as wrong, but cracks appeared in his certainty. The man who'd denied us light was slowly beginning to see his own darkness. Whether genuine change was possible remained uncertain. The community slowly healed from its division, though scars remained. New homeschool oversight policies were debated. Churches examined their teachings about family authority. The judge giving Dad therapy instead of just prison time shows real wisdom because breaking these terrible patterns takes more than punishment. And Emma's progress with 30 minutes of light without panic attacks is huge considering where she started. Some progress came from our pain, though the cost felt too high. Change happened incrementally, one policy at a time. I trained to become a social worker specializing in religious abuse cases. My professors warned about secondary trauma from working with familiar situations, but my experience provided insight textbooks couldn't teach. I understood the subtle signs others might miss. My pain had purpose, even if I'd never have chosen this path. Recovery meant accepting that some damage was permanent. My vision would always be sensitive. My bones would remain fragile. Trust would come slowly, if at all. But I was learning to build a life around these limitations, rather than being defined by them. Healing didn't mean returning to who I'd been before. That girl was gone forever. The irony wasn't lost on me that breaking free from darkness had led to a different kind of isolation. I couldn't relate to peers who complained about strict parents. My trauma set me apart in ways that felt insurmountable. But slowly, I found others who understood survival. We built connections from shared understanding rather than shared experiences. Looking back, I understood that justice hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd expected. Dad's imprisonment and Mom's probation didn't undo years of abuse. The community's division didn't restore my childhood. Legal victory felt hollow compared to the magnitude of loss, but it had stopped the cycle. Emma and Michael would have futures. I chose my name legally on my 18th birthday. The name my parents gave me carried too much pain. Choosing my own identity felt like the ultimate rejection of Dad's control. I selected something simple, common, unremarkable. After years of being a cautionary tale, I wanted to disappear into normalcy. Some nights I still woke expecting darkness. The streetlight outside my window became an anchor to reality. I wasn't in that sealed room anymore. The flashlight Michael gave me sat in my nightstand drawer, no longer needed but too precious to discard. It reminded me that even in the darkest places, someone had tried to bring light. My story became a case study in social work textbooks, anonymized but recognizable to those who knew. Future social workers would learn from our system's failures, the signs that were missed, the reports that went nowhere, the community complicity that enabled abuse. If our pain prevented one child from suffering similarly, perhaps it meant something. I learned to cook in light, appreciating every visible ingredient. Grocery shopping felt like a miracle, seeing colorful produce instead of feeling for shapes in darkness. Simple activities carried profound meaning. Every lit room was a choice, every window a freedom. Recovery meant relearning life's basic functions with gratitude instead of fear. The darkness had taken years from me, but it hadn't won. I was building a life in the light, imperfect, but mine. Emma was slowly healing. Michael had the normal childhood he deserved. Mom was learning accountability. Dad was confronting his demons. The cycle was breaking, one difficult day at a time. My permanent light sensitivity served as a daily reminder of where I'd been, but it also reminded me of how far I'd come. The girl who'd lived in darkness was learning to walk in light, even when it hurt. Some journeys are measured not in miles, but in moments of choosing hope over fear. I understood now that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. There would always be bad days when the darkness felt close, but there would also be moments of profound gratitude for simple freedoms. The ability to see my own reflection, to feel sunlight on my face, to choose when to turn lights on or off. These weren't just freedoms, they were daily victories over a past that had tried to destroy me. The future remained uncertain, but it was mine to shape. No one would ever control my access to light again. That knowledge, more than any verdict or therapy session, was what made survival possible. I was free, and that freedom was worth every difficult step toward healing. Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the video. Please subscribe for more content just like this. Multiple stories being uploaded every single day.